So let's look next at glucose-mediated insulin secretion. So we want to understand, before we get into the mechanism of action of all these drugs, how our body senses glucose levels and then releases insulin. So here's our pancreatic beta cell that makes the insulin. And we have this glucose transporters here. So they take up glucose, so they sense glucose. And this is GLUT2. And take up the glucose. And the glucose is broken down by glycolysis to generate ATP. So we're generating energy in form of ATP. And here we have potassium channels. So potassium leaves the cell, and they are ATP sensitive. So they're called ATP sensitive potassium channels. And once the ATP rises, this channel is going to close. So the ATP is going to close this channel. So I'm going to make an inhibition here. So it's going to close this channel. So positive charges will accumulate in the cell. And what is the consequences? Well, voltage-gated calcium channels. So let's make here such a voltage-gated calcium channel. Voltage-gated calcium channel will open up and let in calcium. The moment we get calcium, calcium triggers exocytosis. So now here in this pancreatic beta cell, we have these vesicles with insulin. And now the moment we get in calcium, we're going to trigger the release of insulin. Because these vesicles are going to fuse with the plasma membrane and you're going to trigger the release of insulin. So that's how glucose mediates insulin release from this pancreatic beta cell. Now let's think about what is insulin gonna do? Well, we know that the job of insulin is to lower glucose. And it helps us store glucose away, because now we have glucose in our blood. It's going to be detected. We make insulin to store the glucose away, so that our glucose levels are going to go down, because otherwise we would have hyperglycemia. So we want to store the glucose away. How does insulin do that? Well, it has several target organs that helps us to bring the glucose level down by storing it away or by shutting down mechanisms that would produce more glucose. So let's start with storing it away. Well, here that's our skeletal muscle. Once there is insulin around, we're going to start expressing more GLUT4 on the skeletal muscle. So we're going to upregulate, so we're going to make here a positive GLUT4, and then the glucose can be stored away. So glucose into the skeletal muscle. So that's skeletal muscle. Insulin does also have a lot of effects on adipose tissue. It does something very similar. It helps to store away glucose via this GLUT4. So GLUT4 is also going to be upregulated in the adipocytes, and therefore you can store glucose into adipocytes. But also remember, insulin is a fat storing hormone, so it increases lipogenesis, so you're going to store more fat. That's also a reason why you're going to gain weight on insulin. So this is also an effect of insulin. Just store the glucose away. And then it also has effects on the liver, because let's draw in here a liver. Insulin shuts down glucose production. So the insulin makes glucose from scratch in a process called gluconeogenesis, so glucose production. And what insulin does, it inhibits gluconeogenesis.